before the 60s. I've called this the 60s poetry scene. Look into my nursery, poetics of nurseries. And really it was Nissim Ezekiel, Ramanujan and Dom Moraes who were the progenitors of this phase of modernism in poetry, and they were working in English and in the late 50s. After that, there were names like, and of course, there was K.T. Daruwala in the north, not in Bombay, and Jayanta Mahapatra in Odisha, but he came much later because he was in his 40s when he published his first book. Then there was V. Patel and Adil Jasawala and Dilip Chitre, who again were my contemporaries, but they were senior. I came along at the end of the 60s, I finished my master's, and at that time I had started writing and publishing. Now, the experience of having my first book published was really exhilarating, and not only because it was my first, but because it was a do-it-yourself effort. There was nobody to, say that we are going to publish your work. We all had to do it ourselves. And the example that was set in those days was by Clearinghouse. This was set up by Adil primarily, Adil Jasawala, and the other names that I have mentioned. So, in terms of production values, Arun Kolatkar was the designer, he was the graphic artist, and he is one of the most outstanding poets. He wrote in Marathi and in English. And he is not so widely known as he should be, especially in the West. Sometimes people draw a blank when you mention names like Nissim Ezekiel and Arun Kolatkar. They were really giants in their art. So he was the one who designed all the covers, and the shape of the book was kind of squarish. And marketing was done via paid subscriptions at a discount. In those days, the price of the book was like rupees 25, which was like a quarter maybe. And on that, we gave discounts so people could pre-order, and we knew if we printed 300 copies, then at least 100 of them would be sold without any trouble. And then when I went on to do my book, I was involved in all the aspects of publication. Finding a printer, designing a cover, which I did myself, buying mailing lists. We would go to the Jahangir Art Gallery and other institutions to get mailing lists to send to interested buyers. Arranging reviews and doing readings. Readings were the main vehicle by which we sold our books. And we didn't have marketing specialists to do this, and poets are lousy salesmen. So we had to do everything by ourselves. And we called us, there were two groups, Clearinghouse and New Ground. New Ground was a set of younger poets, but we saw that Clearinghouse was so successful in its design venture that we stuck to the elements established by them. And on the release of the book, I undertook a nationwide tour of college campuses in Baroda, and Delhi, Madras, Hyderabad and Bangalore. The places where we could publish outside, of book covers, there were magazines. There were not many, but there were some. There was the Illustrated Weekly, which again Nissim had sent the precedent. He was the literary editor, because Nissim was, among other things, an art critic as well. And he used to write for the Times of India. He used to review local exhibitions. He also edited or ran the literary section of a magazine called Imprint. And he worked out of a garage in a high-rise building in Colaba. And I used to take my amateur efforts of writing poetry to him, and he would gracefully and painstakingly read through my text and offer criticism, and I would make corrections, and it was a great feeling to have somebody act as an influencing force. There was Gentleman magazine, these were, popular fashion magazines and so on, a little mix of politics, a little bit of culture and so on. But there was a poetry page, so we loved it. 2-page spread, in fact. It was a pretty good sized magazine. And there was an artist who did a portrait of the poets. There were outlets like the Opinion magazine and Quest, which were extremely influential. Quest was a kind of reflection of Encounter magazine in England at that time, and also got its funding from some sort of supposedly dubious sources. But who cared, as long as they provided us a forum. And then there was a very little magazine. It was almost a booklet called Opinion, and it was done by somebody who had a personal interest in poetry. He was not only a great promoter of poetry, he paid the poets. He actually paid 25 rupees or 50 rupees a poem, and this was a thrill to be acknowledged and then to be said you deserve to be paid. At that time, I was doing my master's degree in Bombay University, and I just met a student from those days here today, after 45 years. She said she was my classmate. I was, at that time, P. Lal from Calcutta's Writers' Workshop had published a poetry anthology consisting of 130 poets. It included just about anybody who had, carried a poem in his pocket and then mailed it to P. Lal, and he published it. There was no critical standard at all. And it pissed me off. At that time I said, this is so irresponsible, to promote bad poetry. And so I said, the best way to do, to reply to this is not by criticizing, but to do another anthology. So I selected 15 poets, and I had some other poets and critics write little introductory reviews of the poetry. So it kind of helped establish a set of standards by how poetry could be judged. Because it was a new thing, it was completely new. K.T. Daruvala will testify that I published his poems first in my anthology.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was commissioned by Quest magazine, and I was thrilled. I was a college student, but they put their faith in me, and it really drove me to do my best. So they published it as a special issue, and then that was picked up by Macmillan India. Macmillan India published it as a book. And when I went to Goa to a conference around 2008 or so, I was absolutely bowled over to realize that the English department still studied out of that book. It was a green covered book called Contemporary Poetry in English.
Yes.
And there were students and teachers who regarded me as a god walking in there, oh, the editor of this book that we are studying. They were amazed. And I should tell you that by that time, since 1972 when it appeared, and then in 1977 there was a revised edition, many other better anthologies were published. Among them, K.T. also edited one. And I was kind of wondering why the English departments stuck to the Macmillan edition. And it was simply laziness. And it was simply a set of people who were, forming the syllabus and making decisions, and they didn't want to go through the process all over again to change tests and to, So my book luckily began to be studied, and it was not only Bombay but different universities in India and Australia and other parts of the world. So Arun Kolotkar, I should say a special word about him. There was a little Irani restaurant in Kolaba near Kala Ghoda. One of his books now is called Kala Ghoda. He had a table reserved for him in that Irani restaurant, and he would be found there every morning. If you wanted to go and meet him, chat with him, he would be sitting with his sandwich and coffee and so on. Bombay then had also a gallery across from the street and a restaurant called Samovar, which became the meeting place for all of the writers and artists and so on. Incidentally, Guy Patel was a playwright, a poet, and an art painter. And I was reviewing and doing for television some kind of work. So I also used to do interviews with artists and musicians and actors and so on. And Guy was one of my subjects. He was a friend as well. So Bombay was alive at that time, and still alive it is, with public performances and shows, especially and there were 3 languages, Hindi, Marathi, English. Theatre was absolutely alive. There were kind of Broadway level productions in English, and there were Marathi productions in a small school hall in Dadar. And I met all of the younger playwrights. Girish Karnad's plays were on there. Arun, what's his name now? Not Arun Kolatkar.
Khopkar?
No, I'll come back to that. I'm having a senior moment here. There was the place where we... Yes, 1 minute? Okay. There was a place at the other end of Colaba, Nariman Point, where the NCPA hosted plays and readings. There was the PEN Center at Churchgate, where Nissim had his office, and that was really a historical moment to find Nissim there, sitting at his desk, and anybody, open door, anybody could walk in and out, and he had stacks of books on all the 4 walls, a mess on his table of files and so on, and the bookshelves were leaning so dangerously that they looked as if they would fall. But he was not a good housekeeper. He just sat there as like a god. There was the American Cultural Center, which also kind of helped and promoted the Bombay poets. And we were the cause of great envy among the language poets, and for that I was actually very sympathetic to them. It was English that dominated the scene. The newspapers never looked at anything because they were English language newspapers, and so poetry in English got the benefit of that publicity and so on. And the language poets always kind of felt that their Indian languages were not being promoted, and I believe it was a just complaint on their part. So now, having come here to Austin, today we are in the same situation, because although there are hundreds of publishers, there are thousands of poets who cannot find a publisher. And what we have tried to establish here with Matwala is to make a new beginning and to do our own thing, because if we don't do it for ourselves, nobody else will. Thank you.
We're going to continue with a little bit of